what
And
happened and
reparations
what
happen.
now on the railroad strike? I got you. The hell with it. And what happened on Socialist Alternative? Well, we know 115,000 railroad workers lost their right to strike, but what happened? And we kind of did a postmortem on this. Keely, Mullen from Socialist Alternative wrote this. Working on the railroad's always been challenging till the last several decades. It was a well-paying job with downtime. You had a full crew on each train, and schedule was somewhat predictable. And we've talked about the scheduling in the last several decades. You've got more than 100,000 people, 30% of American goods moving. In the dusty corners of the internet, you can find forums from 10 years ago where railroad workers urge workers in other industries to think long and hard before joining them on the tracks. Why? Well, in January 2012, Railroad Worker wrote, "You have no life, you lose your friends, cannot plan anything. Your life really is the railroad. Imagine walking a 2-mile long train in the 100-degree heat, 0-degree cold, pouring rain or snow. Then, after being on the road 12 hours, going home and being called right back after 10 hours. If you already have a decent job, I would strongly advise against it." Unquote. This is the context for the years of negotiations between 12 unions representing 115,000 workers, railroad workers, and the, again, handful of corporations that control 90% of freight rail traffic. Well, it's the tracks, of course, we know, that carry most passenger trains. So it's an oligopoly. These negotiations now have been brought to a screeching halt.
Fast.
Right? What?
Say that 5 times fast.
It's an oligopoly. These negotiations have now been brought to a screeching halt under the leadership of the self-described, quote, most pro-union president leading the most pro-union administration in American history. That's right, Jack. Workers across 4 unions, which together represent a majority of the thoroughly overburdened workers, sheet metal air rail and transport workers, transportation division, the Brotherhood of Railway Signalmen, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees and Teamsters, and the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, they all rejected this proposed contract. But the votes of 80 U.S. senators and 290 U.S. representatives were enough to enforce the deal that the rail magnates wanted and prevent workers from striking for a fair contract. We've seen all this, but the outcome was that one that the bosses had counted on from the start, knowing they had both political parties in their pockets. Okay, as a proud pro-labor president, I'm proud to override the ratification procedures and views of those who voted against the agreement. He's proud. Oh, he said he's reluctant. I'm sorry. Joe Biden said in the tweet the day before the sellout vote. But in this case, where the economic impact of a shutdown would hurt millions, I believe Congress must use its powers to adopt this deal. Well, yeah, we've heard all about this, but
we gotta.
There's a bigger story here, and it's about what's happening with this precision scheduled railroading that in the 90s, as these giant rail corporations grew, they started professionally putting their people on a schedule called precision scheduled railroading. PSR meant routes were slashed, rail yards closed, trains were lengthened, and expected to run for much longer stretches of time. Tens of thousands of workers laid off, right, placing the burden of increasingly difficult work on a smaller workforce. And in just the last 7 years, we've talked about this, railroads have cut as much as 35% of workers in certain titles. And it's like, a quarter of their workforce or more. Today, these longer freight trains are in some cases operated by a one-person crew. One person is a crew now, whereas historically a 5-person crew would communicate up and down the train. Now just one worker is responsible for operating the entire train while communicating on the radio with dispatchers, signal maintainers, foremen, other train crews, as well as maintaining all the paperwork, including keeping track of all hazardous materials above the train. Now, there might not be a problem there, right? If that single worker were to have a heart attack on the job, or even just got sleepy after a 12-hour stretch with nothing more than federally mandated breaks, the consequences could be catastrophic. And after making it through the shift, they can expect to get a few hours of sleep at a motel in the middle of nowhere while keeping their phone on full volume in case they're called back to work, because they don't have enough people. Then they talk about here, 2013, a train with 72 tank cars full of crude oil. I remember watching this on Rachel Maddow,
Yeah.
believe it or not. She talked about train bombs, and this became a big thing. Like, okay, the failure was, now this was outside Quebec, but it happened here in Pennsylvania and a couple of states where a a tank car full of oil, yeah. Now this one exploded in the center of town, destroying it and killed 47 people. Wow, I don't remember hearing that. Almost mile-long train had only one single engineer. Crucial brake stability test could have prevented the accident, but it would have required 2 employees to do it. After the disaster, the Canadian government reversed itself, mandated at least 2-person crews for trains carrying hazardous materials. Wow. Still, you need 5 people.
Just 2 people for a whole fucking like.
You still need 5
Sorry.
people. Right?
No, it's just fucking. They do this in every industry, and it's sad that they're doing it here too, to stuff that is hazardous.
Well, it puts us all at risk because the rails go right across the
Yes.
roads. But it's in this dangerous context that rail corporations are making record profits. Of course, we know that in 2016, amidst flurry of cutbacks at Union Pacific, second largest railroad in the U.S., CEO Lance Fritz cut himself a $10 million check. This is nothing compared to the money the bosses give themselves today. In the last 3 years, the CEOs of the 5 largest rail conglomerates have been paid more than $200 million. That's insane. Wealthy company shareholders have been given nearly $200 billion in stock buybacks and dividends. That's even more insane. And who did this? Of course, we know it was our friend, our good friends, the Democrats, right? Right, Bernie? They're the ones that called the vote to break the strike. So how does all this lead us today, where under the direction of Biden, Democrats and Republicans in Congress join hands to crush the workers' impending strike? Well, to understand this betrayal, we have to go back. And again, people have talked about the Railway Labor Act in 1926. The RLA's legislative ancestry can be traced as far back as the strike-breaking warfare of 1877. I mean, we're talking 150 years now. The law allows
RLA, Nikki, what?
RLA, yeah, that does look like the Railway, yes, Labor Act, the RLA. But she's Nikki Chicana now. The law allows the president to intervene in
naming. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh boy. The law allows the president to intervene in labor disputes that, quote, threaten substantially to interrupt interstate commerce. And this is what Biden did in September with full backing of the union's toothless misleadership. Yes. His administration brokered a new tentative agreement between the rail magnates and the 12 unions representing the rail workers, even though the rail workers overwhelmingly rejected that agreement. The agreement included modest wage gains, though in the context of rampant inflation, any wage increase without a cost of living adjustment amounts to a pay cut, but did not give workers any paid sick leave. Unreal, a key demand of rail workers who currently have 0 guaranteed sick days. They have other vacation days, but they have to use those days for sick days. When the Biden brokered TA was sent to rail workers for a vote, it was defeated in 4 of the 12 unions, right, representing nearly 60% of all rail workers. And this meant that a strike was back on the table, sending the Democratic Party leadership into crisis, knowing it'd be on them to crush the strike at all costs. And this is something that the Democrats are familiar with, though, because Democratic presidents have crushed strikes in each of the following years, 41, 45, twice in 78, Bill Clinton in 94, 97, and of course, Barack Obama famously in 2011. So I don't think we're really covering anything that we haven't covered already so far. But that only 4 of the unions voted against it. That did 8 vote for it? I mean, they're not saying that, but it seems like 8 of the unions did vote that represented 40% of the membership of those 8 unions. Hang on one second. Who voted to crush the strike and who didn't? It's a matter of principle. Anyone who votes to break a strike, no friend of working people. We know this. So there's no amount of strategic justification that can undo it. Striking is the single most powerful tool that workers have to win their demands because it brings profit making to a halt. And that's the one thing that scares billionaire bosses the most. Yes, Proof of this, we can look to the postal worker strike 1970. 200,000 federal postal workers took an illegal strike action. Remember, illegal. And then they won. They overcame Nixon's attempts to use the National Guard to break the strike. They overcame their union leadership's conservative hesitancy, and they won. They secured a significant pay increase, a faster step increases, a cost of living adjustment, and ended the practice of postal workers being forced to sit in a swing room unpaid while waiting for work. I remember that. Reef, I think your camera got knocked over.
Yep.
Politicians across the aisle, but under the leadership of the Democrats, took away workers' best weapon to win their demands. And this is what capitalist politicians are there to do. They're not neutral individuals. The entire election system binds them to their funders so that they'll defend the interests of billionaires against those of workers. Shamefully, of course, we know progressives in Congress, quote unquote, were accomplices in this. Any notion that AOC or Jamal Bowman, DSA in the House, can be considered socialist should fully be dispelled at this point. I think so too. So what now? It's crucial that workers everywhere learn the lessons of this betrayal. And first and foremost, that neither the Democrats nor Republicans will ever prioritize the needs of workers over their system's thirst for profit. Yeah, no surprise, but some people just haven't heard this yet. They're both firmly held tools of the billionaire class. Workers deserve a political voice of our own. Yes, totally agree. So, second and connected.
No.
Union leaders, right, have a well-established practice for many decades of fastening themselves to the rear end of the Democratic Party. And in 2020, the Teamsters, who absorbed BMW ED, okay, that's the third largest rail union, in 2004, gave over $2.1 million to Democratic candidates. And for what? To get sold down the river. In fact, over the summer, Teamsters leaders Sean O'Brien and Fred Zuckerman welcomed Biden's intervention, though they later attempted an about-face.
Zuckermanberg?
Right. We need an active rank-and-file movement within the unions pushing for genuine internal democracy, including democratic oversight over the small d, not Democratic Party, but democratic oversight over the spending of union members' dues money, as well as for political independence for both parties of big business. Okay. Already, there are very positive signs that this is afoot in the rail unions. Just this week, members of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, the BLET, this is what I was talking about, they voted to oust their president, Dennis Pierce, as punishment for his collusion with Biden. And the consequences of this betrayal will be brutal for railroad workers who will now be forced to continue working in hazardous conditions. But it can also serve as a wake-up call for the left and labor movement to fight for a fundamentally new strategy, one defined by political independence, genuine democracy, and class struggle militancy. Yeah, I mean, we have no home in either major political party. Hey, what's that? Check that out.
But we do have a store. You can find awesome goodies. You get you a hoodie.
We got shop.
Check it out. Beanie.
You get some merch. And that beanie's embroidered. T-shirt. It's hot. I'm waiting for it to arrive in the mail. We got a couple shirts. We got hoodies.
A onesie.
We got Zip Up. Indie Media Today for the Substack. We got Indie Left News. We got How Do We Miss That? Got a little bit of everything.